Someone asked me the craziest thing this week. How if the sun disappeared for 24 hours? And I had to find out. You wake up one morning and the sun is gone. Not hidden behind clouds, not in an eclipse, not dimmed, just gone. 1 second it was blazing in the sky and the next, total darkness. If this sounds like the setup for a bad sci-fi movie, well, buckle up because the reality of what would happen is way stranger, scarier, and also weirder than you think. And remember, it's only for 24 hours, the sun will come back. But those 24 hours? They'll be unforgettable. The very first thing you'd notice is light. Or rather, the lack of it. Within about 8 minutes of the sun vanishing, because that's how long it takes sunlight to reach us, the earth would suddenly plunge into darkness. Daytime would instantly turn into the kind of pitch-black night you normally only see in the middle of nowhere, far from city lights. Birds would freak out. Streetlights and car headlights would snap on automatically. People would be whipping out their phones, searching the sky, wondering if they'd just gone blind. Imagine New York at 2 p.m. suddenly looking like 2 a.m. The confusion alone would be massive. But light is just the beginning. The sun doesn't only give us brightness, it gives us warmth. The moment it disappears, Earth stops receiving the 173,000 terawatts of solar energy that normally bathe the planet. Don't worry, you won't freeze solid instantly. The atmosphere and oceans act like a giant thermal battery holding on to heat. But the temperature would start dropping, fast. Within the first hour, you might feel a noticeable chill. Within 24 hours, the average surface temperature could fall by several degrees Celsius. That might not sound like much, but it's enough to start stressing ecosystems, and it's just the first day. Meanwhile, human behavior? Chaos. Think about it. Half the world would be thrown into an unexpected, endless night, while the other half, which was already in darkness, would just never see morning. Power grids would strain under everyone flipping on their lights at once. Supermarkets would be swarmed with people panic buying candles, batteries, and maybe even space heaters. News stations would scramble to explain. Some would claim it's the apocalypse. Others would say it's aliens. And honestly, most of us would just be trying to figure out if this was permanent. After all, nobody told us the sun would be back in 24 hours. Animals would be just as confused. Birds that navigate by the sun? Grounded. Plants that rely on photosynthesis? They'd pause like a computer waiting for power. In fact, if you looked at the Amazon rainforest, you'd see millions of square kilometers of leaves suddenly go on standby. Crops and fields around the world would stop photosynthesizing for an entire day. That's not enough to kill them outright, but it would throw off their rhythm. It's like pulling an all-nighter. You survive, but you're wrecked the next day. Now here's where it gets even stranger. Gravity. Most people think of the sun as just our big light bulb in the sky, but it's also the anchor of the entire solar system. The Earth doesn't orbit light, it orbits mass. If the sun completely disappeared, we wouldn't just lose daylight, we'd lose the gravitational pull keeping us in orbit. Earth would shoot off in a straight line through space like a roller coaster car suddenly detaching from its track. The moon would go with us like a loyal passenger. That's the good news. The bad news? In the long run, Earth would drift into the cold void, away from the warmth of any star. But wait, you said only 24 hours, right? Okay, then let's imagine a bizarre loophole where the sun's gravity stays, but the sun's light and heat vanish for exactly 1 day. That way Earth doesn't fling off into interstellar space, and we can focus on what life would actually feel like for those 24 sunless hours. So, in this scenario we're stuck with the darkness and the cooling, but not instant solar system destruction. A little more fun, a little less doom. So let's zoom in. Cities would light up like Christmas, but so would the sky. Without the sun's glare, the stars would blaze across the heavens, visible even from the middle of a metropolis. People in London could suddenly see the Milky Way arcing overhead. Astronomers would have a field day. Telescopes that normally wait for night could work around the clock. It would be the best stargazing party in human history, if only everyone wasn't panicking. Air travel would get weird too. Planes use sunlight for orientation and visibility. Without it, every flight in the sky would suddenly be crossing through midnight conditions. Pilots would switch to full instrument navigation. Airports would scramble to handle delays. Imagine trying to land in complete, unexpected darkness across thousands of runways worldwide. Chaos doesn't even begin to cover it. And speaking of chaos, what about psychology? Humans have circadian rhythms that depend on light cues. Take those away and our bodies start to freak out. In just 1 day, millions of people would get insomnia. Night shift workers might feel oddly fine while everyone else drags like zombies. Hospitals would see spikes in confusion, anxiety, and maybe even accidents as people try to drive or work without their normal daylight rhythm. How? Think bigger, weather. The sun drives winds, storms, and currents. Shut it off for 24 hours and you've basically paused the engine of Earth's atmosphere. Clouds would stop forming normally. Winds would weaken. Some regions might suddenly see eerily still, frozen skies. Others could experience weird turbulence as warm and cold air masses collide in ways they normally wouldn't. Meteorologists would lose their minds trying to forecast a day without sunlight. But here's a question you might not have thought of. What happens to solar power? Worldwide, millions of homes and businesses rely on solar panels. With no sunlight, all of that generation would drop to zero instantly. Entire countries, like Germany or parts of California, that rely heavily on solar would be plunged into an energy crisis overnight. Backup plants would roar online, but blackouts could spread. That means food spoiling, medical equipment failing, and people suddenly realizing just how dependent we are on a star we take for granted. And we're only halfway through. Because if you think a single day without the sun is just about dark skies and cooler weather, wait until you see what happens globally, to the oceans, to ecosystems, and to our place in the solar system. That's where things get really wild. So let's pick up from there. 24 hours without the sun isn't just about people panicking, lights flickering, and animals acting confused. The deeper effects would creep in silently, affecting the very systems that make Earth livable. And the scariest part? Some of these changes wouldn't just snap back the second the sun returned. First up, the oceans. Water is the planet's biggest heat reservoir, absorbing sunlight all day, every day. Take away that input for just 24 hours, and the surface of the ocean starts losing heat rapidly. On average, sea surfaces might cool by about 0.5 degrees Celsius. That sounds tiny, but in ocean terms, it's enormous. Even a fraction of a degree can shift currents, alter weather patterns, and confuse marine life. Coral reefs, which depend on stable conditions, would go into stress mode. Plankton, the base of the marine food web, would stop photosynthesizing. And here's the kicker. Since plankton produce a huge fraction of Earth's oxygen, even one day without the sun would shave a noticeable chunk off global oxygen output. Meanwhile, on land, plants would be in a strange limbo. Without sunlight, they pause photosynthesis, switching to survival mode by burning stored sugars instead. For 24 hours, that's manageable, but imagine the ripple effect. Crops wouldn't grow for a full day, trees wouldn't sequester carbon, and ecosystems that depend on plant productivity would feel a temporary hiccup. Farmers might not notice immediately, but if this happened repeatedly, food systems could collapse. In other words, we just dodged a global agricultural disaster thanks to that 24-hour limit. But humans wouldn't escape the consequences so easily. The lack of solar heating would mess with the weather in subtle, eerie ways. Remember, the sun is the ultimate driver of wind and storms. Without it, pressure differences that drive breezes would flatten out. Imagine walking outside into a world with no wind, leaves still, flags drooping, air eerily stagnant. Pollution in big cities would hang in place, trapped without convection to disperse it. Skies could turn hazy, visibility would drop, and breathing might get tougher for millions of people in smog-heavy regions. Now here's a fun twist. Astronomy would explode with opportunity. With no sun, telescopes could observe stars, galaxies, and even faint objects normally drowned out by daylight all day long. Scientists could track asteroids, map exoplanets, and maybe even spot cosmic phenomena that usually slip past us. For astronomers, these 24 hours would be like Black Friday shopping. Overwhelming but irresistible. Of course, all those observations would stop the second the sun reappeared, but the data haul could rewrite textbooks. And yet, a darker twist looms: energy collapse. Solar power contributes about 4 to 5% of global electricity right now, but in places like California, Spain, or Germany, the share is much higher. Imagine the grid suddenly losing that entire fraction. Backup plants would fire up, but demand would spike simultaneously as everyone switched on lights, heaters, and gadgets. The result? Blackouts. In hospitals, life support systems might wobble. In homes, refrigerators would start warming. In factories, production lines would grind to a halt. A single day-long blackout could cost economies billions. And that's just money. The real stakes are human lives. Let's zoom out even further. Beyond Earth, our neighbors would also notice the sun's vanishing act. Jupiter's swirling storms? Frozen in place. Saturn's dazzling rings? Left in darkness. Even distant Pluto would feel the sudden absence of sunlight. For the outer solar system, it would be as if someone switched off the stage lights in a theater. Eerie, silent, unsettling. And for spacecraft like Voyager still wandering at the edge of interstellar space, Earth's distress signals would suddenly spike, sending a bizarre blip into the cosmic record. But here's the haunting question: what happens when the sun comes back? Instantly, daylight would return, and with it, a blast of heat. After a day of cooling, Earth's atmosphere and surface would suddenly absorb that torrent of energy. Imagine condensation forming into thick, fast-building clouds. Thunderstorms could erupt wildly, fueled by the sudden imbalance. Flooding rains, hail, maybe even tornadoes, a global reboot storm, might sweep the planet. Weather forecasters would throw their hands up, because predicting the first hours of sunlight after a blackout would be nearly impossible. Psychologically, humans would be scarred. Even though the sun returned, trust in nature's consistency would be shattered. Religions would form overnight around the disappearance. Governments would be pressured to explain the unexplainable. Children would grow up with stories of the day the sun vanished. For some, it would be awe-inspiring. For others, deeply traumatic. Our species depends so much on routine that a single break in the sun's daily cycle could reshape culture permanently. Now let's toy with a twist. What if this kept happening? Imagine if every year for just one day the sun disappeared. We'd adapt. Backup energy systems would be designed specifically for sunless day. Festivals would emerge where people gather to stargaze and share stories. Scientists would plan missions around it. Maybe humanity would even start looking harder for alternate energy sources. Nuclear fusion, antimatter, or tapping geothermal power. A crisis could become a catalyst. So what's the ultimate takeaway? The sun isn't just a ball of gas lighting the sky. It's the beating heart of every system we rely on: air, water, food, energy, even our mental health. Losing it for 24 hours wouldn't kill us outright, but it would shake civilization in ways we're not prepared for. And maybe that's the point. We take daylight so for granted that it feels permanent. But what if it isn't? If you enjoyed this thought experiment, imagine what other cosmic curveballs we could explore. Drop your wildest what-if ideas in the comments, subscribe for more brain-bending scenarios, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be better prepared when the universe throws us its next impossible question.